A torn newspaper blew across the empty lot as Marcus shifted his weight from one foot to the other. The other men around him looked just as tired, just as hungry. They all waited for the same thing, someone to pick them for a day's work. Most days, nobody picked Marcus anymore. His beard had grown too long, his clothes too dirty. But today felt different. Maybe it was the way the clouds hung low, or maybe it was just hope playing tricks on his mind again. Before we continue with the story, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel to listen to more stories like this one. The construction site across the street buzzed with activity. Big machines moved piles of dirt. Workers in bright yellow hard hats shouted instructions to each other. A tall fence surrounded the whole area, with signs that warned people to stay out. But Marcus knew that sometimes they needed extra help. Sometimes they picked a few guys from the crowd of homeless men who gathered here every morning. Marcus pulled his torn jacket tighter around his shoulders. The wind cut through the thin fabric like it was made of paper. He'd been sleeping under the highway bridge for 3 weeks now. Before that, it was the parking garage downtown. Before that, the old warehouse on 5th Street until the police kicked everyone out. He couldn't remember the last time he'd slept in a real bed. Couldn't remember the last time he'd eaten a hot meal that wasn't from a shelter. A white truck pulled up to the fence. The driver got out and walked toward their group. He was a big man with arms like tree trunks and a permanent scowl on his face. Rodriguez, the guys called him. He'd hired Marcus twice before, and both times he'd made it clear he thought homeless people were less than human. Rodriguez looked over the group of men like he was shopping for tools. His eyes stopped on Marcus for a second, then moved on. Marcus felt his heart sink. Not today, then. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe never. But then Rodriguez pointed at 6 men, including Marcus. "You," he said, not bothering with names. "Construction cleanup. 8 hours. Cash at the end if you don't mess up." Marcus followed the other chosen men toward the gate. His stomach growled loudly enough that the man next to him chuckled. "When's the last time you ate?" the man asked. Marcus had to think about it. "Yesterday morning, I think. The shelter had breakfast." The man shook his head. "Name's Tommy. Stick with me today. I'll share my lunch if you help me move the heavy stuff." "Marcus," he replied, grateful for the kindness. He'd learned that homeless people often helped each other more than anyone else would. They walked through the gate and into organized chaos. The construction site was huge, bigger than 3 football fields put together. Half-built walls reached toward the sky like concrete fingers. Cranes swung loads of steel beams through the air. The noise was incredible. Hammering, drilling, shouting, engines rumbling. Rodriguez led them to a pile of broken concrete chunks near the back of the site. "Load all this into the dumpster over there," he said, pointing to a green container the size of a small house. "Don't take all day." Marcus picked up his first piece of concrete. It was heavier than it looked, rough against his hands. He'd done this kind of work before, back when he could still get regular jobs. Back when he had an apartment and clean clothes and people who knew his name. As he worked, Marcus noticed something strange. Every few minutes, he felt like someone was watching him. He'd look up at the office trailers scattered around the site, trying to spot whoever it was. But the windows were too far away, too dark to see inside. The feeling stayed with him all morning. It made the hair on his neck stand up, made him work a little faster. He wasn't paranoid. 30 years on the streets had taught him to trust his instincts. Someone was definitely watching him. By lunchtime, Marcus's back ached and his hands were bleeding from the rough concrete. Rodriguez hadn't spoken to any of them since the morning, except to yell when someone moved too slowly. Tommy shared his sandwich like he'd promised, and they sat in the shade of an unfinished wall to eat. "You ever feel like you're being watched?" Marcus asked between bites. Tommy looked around. "All the time, brother. Security cameras everywhere. Supervisors checking up on us. Rich people driving by in their fancy cars, staring at us like we're animals in a zoo. No, I mean really watched. Like someone specific." Tommy shrugged. "Maybe one of the bosses is thinking about hiring you full-time. You work harder than most of the regular guys here." Marcus wanted to believe that, but the feeling was different. It wasn't the casual observation of a supervisor. It felt personal, like whoever was watching him knew something he didn't. The afternoon dragged on. Load concrete, carry it to the dumpster, go back for more. Marcus's shoulders screamed with each trip, but he pushed through the pain. He needed this job to last, needed the money Rodriguez had promised. As the sun started to set, painting the sky orange and pink, Rodriguez finally called them over. He counted out bills from a thick roll of cash, handing each man their pay for the day. When he got to Marcus, he paused. "You," Rodriguez said. "Be here tomorrow morning. Same time." Marcus felt a rush of relief so strong it almost knocked him over. Work tomorrow meant food tomorrow. Meant another night in a cheap motel instead of under the bridge. As the group of day laborers walked back toward the gate, Marcus glanced up at the office trailers one more time. In one of the windows, he saw a shadow move. Someone had definitely been watching him all day. But who? And why? The feeling followed him all the way back to the bridge where he'd been sleeping. Even as he settled down on his cardboard mat, pulling his thin blanket around him, Marcus couldn't shake the sensation that somewhere in the darkness, eyes were still on him. He stared up at the concrete ceiling of the bridge, listening to cars rumble overhead. Tomorrow he'd go back to the construction site. Tomorrow he'd work hard and earn another day's pay. But he couldn't stop wondering about the person in the window. What do they want? What had they seen in him that made them watch so carefully? Sleep came slowly, filled with dreams of eyes in dark windows and questions he couldn't answer. The elevator climbed slowly toward the 15th floor, each number lighting up like a countdown. Henry Blackstone gripped his walking cane with hands that had signed billion-dollar deals, but now shook with something much more powerful than age. He hadn't slept in 3 days, not since seeing the man at the construction site. The man who moved like David. The man who touched his temple exactly the way his son used to do when he was thinking hard about something. Henry stepped out of the elevator and walked down the quiet hallway. His footsteps echoed off the marble floor. Even at 94, he still came to the office every day, still made decisions that affected thousands of people. But today, all he could think about was the homeless man loading concrete into a dumpster. His assistant, Maria, looked up from her desk as he approached. She'd worked for him for 20 years and knew every expression on his face. "Mr. Blackstone, you look like you haven't slept. Maybe you should go home early today." "Maria, I need you to do something for me," Henry said, ignoring her concern. Very quietly, very carefully, she picked up her pen, ready to take notes. "Of course, sir. There's a man working at our downtown construction site. Homeless. Probably in his 60s. I need to know everything about him. Where he sleeps, where he eats, how long he's been on the streets. But don't let anyone know you're asking." Maria's eyebrows went up slightly. Henry had built his fortune by caring about big pictures, not individual workers. This request was unusual, even for him. "Is there a problem with this man, sir? Should I call security?" Henry walked to his window and looked out at the city below. Somewhere down there, among all those buildings and streets, was the man who might be his son. The son he'd lost 35 years ago when that plane went down over the Amazon jungle. The son whose body was never found, whose death he'd never fully accepted. "No problem," Henry said quietly. "Just curiosity." That was a lie, and they both knew it. Henry Blackstone didn't get curious about homeless workers. He donated millions to shelters and soup kitchens, but he did it from a distance. He signed checks, not because he'd seen individual faces. After Maria left to start her research, Henry sat at his massive oak desk and opened the bottom drawer. Inside, beneath important papers and contracts, was a small wooden box. He'd carried it with him for 35 years, through every office move, every business deal, every lonely night. The box held 3 things. A photo of David at age 28, taken just before his last business trip. A letter David had written him but never sent, found later in his apartment. And a small silver compass that Henry had given David for his 16th birthday. Henry studied the photo carefully. David had been handsome, successful, full of life and plans. He'd been groomed to take over the company someday. Instead, his plane had crashed in the middle of nowhere, and search teams had found only wreckage and 5 other bodies. Never David's. The letter was harder to look at. David had written it during one of their arguments about the company's direction. David had wanted to focus more on helping people, less on making money. Henry had thought his son was being naive, unrealistic. The letter apologized for the argument and said David hoped they could talk more when he got back from South America. They never got that chance to talk. Maria returned 2 hours later with a thin folder. Asked around carefully, like you said. The man's name is Marcus. No last name that anyone knows. He's been homeless for about 15 years, maybe longer. Sleeps under bridges, in shelters when there's space. Never causes trouble, works when he can find it. Henry opened the folder. There wasn't much inside, a few notes from shelter workers, a police report from 5 years ago when Marcus had been robbed and beaten. No photo, no fingerprints, no real identification. There's something else, Maria said, looking uncomfortable. One of the shelter volunteers said Marcus has some kind of memory problem. He never talks about his past, says he can't remember much from before he ended up on the streets. Head injury, maybe. Henry's hands started shaking again. A head injury could explain memory loss. Could explain why a man who looked like David didn't know he was David. Sir, are you all right? You look pale. Henry closed the folder and put it in his desk drawer next to the wooden box. Maria, I'm going to ask you to do something that might sound crazy. More crazy than researching homeless men? She asked with a small smile. I want you to arrange for me to visit the construction site tomorrow. I want to observe the workers, especially this Marcus. Can you make up some reason for me to be there? Maria nodded slowly. I'll tell them you want to do a safety inspection. You haven't visited a job site in years, so they'll probably panic and clean everything twice. Perfect. And Maria, this stays between us. No one else needs to know about any of this. After she left, Henry sat alone in his office as the sun set over the city. He'd built an empire worth billions of dollars, but all of it meant nothing if David was really out there, living on the streets, not even knowing who he was. The next morning, Henry rode in his black car toward the construction site. He'd barely slept, his mind spinning with possibilities. What if it really was David? How could he prove it? How could he help a son who didn't remember being his son? The car pulled up to the construction site gate just as the day laborers were being selected for work. Henry watched through the tinted windows as Rodriguez pointed at men in the crowd. When the big supervisor's finger pointed at the man Henry thought might be David, his heart nearly stopped. Drive closer, Henry told his driver. I want to get a better look. As they pulled into the site, Henry studied the homeless man more carefully. Even beneath the beard and dirt, even aged by years of hard living, the resemblance was impossible to ignore. The way he held his head, the shape of his shoulders, the careful way he moved, it was like looking at a ghost of his son. Henry spent the morning in the site office, pretending to review safety reports while actually watching Marcus through the window. Every gesture, every movement seemed familiar. When Marcus touched his temple while thinking, Henry's breath caught in his throat. David had done exactly the same thing since he was a little boy. But was it really him? Or was Henry just an old man desperately seeing what he wanted to see? By lunchtime, Henry had made his decision. He had to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. He had to talk to Marcus face to face, look into his eyes, and see if any part of his son was still there. As Henry prepared to leave his watching post and go down to meet the man who might be his son, his hands trembled with a mixture of hope and terror. 35 years of grief and guilt hung in the balance. In a few minutes, he would either find his greatest joy or face his deepest heartbreak all over again. The elevator down to ground level felt like the longest ride of his life. Marcus dropped the concrete chunk when he saw the old man walking toward him. Rich people didn't just wander into construction sites, especially not rich people who needed walking sticks and wore suits that probably cost more than most people made in a year. Every worker on the site had stopped what they were doing to stare. Keep working, Rodriguez barked at the crew, but his voice sounded nervous. Even he seemed confused by the elderly visitor. The old man moved slowly but with purpose, his eyes locked on Marcus like he was the only person in the world. As he got closer, Marcus could see the man's face clearly. Deep wrinkles, silver hair perfectly combed, and the strangest expression, like he was looking at a ghost. "Excuse me," the old man said, his voice shaky. "Could I speak with you for a moment?" Marcus glanced around. The other workers had gone back to their jobs, but he could feel them listening. Rodriguez stood about 20 feet away, pretending to check his clipboard while obviously watching every move. "I'm working, sir. Don't want to get in trouble." The old man looked at Rodriguez. "I'll speak with your supervisor. Take a break." Before Marcus could protest, the old man walked over to Rodriguez. Marcus couldn't hear their conversation, but he could see Rodriguez's face turn from confusion to surprise to something that looked like fear. After a minute, Rodriguez came back over. "Take 15 minutes, Rodriguez said quietly. "But stay where I can see you." The old man led Marcus to a quiet spot behind one of the trailers. Up close, Marcus could see how the man's hand shook, how his breathing seemed labored. He looked like he might fall over at any second. "What's your name?" the old man asked. "Marcus." "Look, sir, if I did something wrong, I'm sorry. I really need this job." "You didn't do anything wrong." The man sat down heavily on a stack of concrete blocks. "Marcus, do you remember anything from before you were on the streets?" The question hit Marcus like a punch to the stomach. People rarely asked about his past, and when they did, he usually changed the subject. The truth was too hard to explain. "Not much," Marcus said carefully. "I had an accident. Head injury. Doctors said the memory loss might be permanent." The old man's eyes filled with tears. "What kind of accident?" Marcus touched his temple, feeling the old scar hidden beneath his hair. "I woke up in a hospital somewhere in South America. Rural place, no real records. The doctor said I'd been brought in after a plane crash. 5 other people died, but somehow I survived." The old man made a sound like he'd been shot. His face went completely white, and for a moment Marcus thought he might need to catch him before he fell. "When?" the old man whispered. "When did this happen?" "I don't know exactly. The hospital didn't keep good records. Maybe 15 years ago. Maybe more. Time gets fuzzy when you can't remember most of your life." The old man pulled out his phone with shaking fingers. "I need to show you something." He found a photo and held it out. "Do you recognize this person?" Marcus looked at the screen. The photo showed a younger man in an expensive suit standing in front of a tall building. The man had dark hair and a confident smile, but there was something familiar about his face, something that made Marcus's head hurt in a strange way. "I don't know," Marcus said honestly. "He looks familiar, maybe, but I can't place him." "That's my son," the old man said, tears streaming down his cheeks now. "His name was David. David Blackstone. He disappeared 35 years ago when his plane crashed in the Amazon jungle. His body was never found." Marcus felt dizzy. The photo, the man's emotional reaction, the way everyone on the construction site was still sneaking glances at them. It was all too much. "Sir, I think you're confused. I'm not your son. I'm just a homeless guy trying to earn enough money for dinner." "Look at this," the old man said, scrolling to another photo. This one showed a young boy, maybe 7 or 8 years old, with a gap-toothed smile and a baseball uniform. David broke his arm when he was 8, falling out of a tree. The bone healed wrong, left a small bump on his wrist. Without thinking, Marcus looked down at his own left wrist. There, just barely visible beneath the dirt and calluses, was a small bump on the bone. He'd always wondered how he'd gotten it. "That doesn't prove anything," Marcus said, but his voice sounded weak even to himself. The old man stood up, moving closer. David had a birthmark on his neck, shaped like a crescent moon. His mother used to say it looked like God had kissed him there. Marcus's hand flew to his neck, covering the small crescent-shaped mark he'd carried his whole remembered life. How could this stranger know about that? "I don't understand what's happening here," Marcus said, backing away. "You're scaring me. Please," the old man begged. "Just let me get a DNA test. One simple test. If I'm wrong, I'll leave you alone forever. But if I'm right," his voice broke completely. "If I'm right, then I've been looking for you for 35 years. Marcus's mind raced. The familiar face in the photo, the scar on his wrist, the birthmark this man knew about. None of it made sense, but it was too many coincidences to ignore. Rodriguez appeared around the corner of the trailer. "Time's up," he called. "Back to work." The old man looked at Rodriguez with an expression that could have melted steel. "We're not finished here. Sir, with respect, this is a construction site, not a social hour. These men have jobs to do. This man works for me, the old man said quietly. Everything here works for me. The cranes, the concrete, the entire building we're constructing. My name is Henry Blackstone, and I own this company. Rodriguez's face went from annoyed to terrified in about 2 seconds. Mr. Blackstone, I'm so sorry, I didn't realize. I mean, nobody told me you were. It's fine, Henry said, not taking his eyes off Marcus. Give us a few more minutes. After Rodriguez practically ran away, Henry turned back to Marcus. I know this is overwhelming. I know it sounds impossible. But what if it's true? What if you really are my son? Marcus stared at this man who claimed to be his father. Part of him wanted to run, to get as far away as possible from his crazy situation. But another part of him, a part he'd kept buried for years, whispered that maybe he finally had a chance to know who he really was. One test, Marcus said finally. But if it shows I'm not your son, you promise to leave me alone? Henry nodded, fresh tears starting. I promise. As they walked back toward the construction site office, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that his life was about to turn upside down completely. For 15 years, he'd been Marcus the homeless man, Marcus nobody. In a few days, he might discover he was someone else entirely. The scary part was, he wasn't sure which possibility frightened him more. The DNA results lay on the table between them like a loaded gun. Henry's hands trembled as he reached for the envelope, while Marcus sat perfectly still in the plastic chair, staring at the white paper that might hold all his answers. They were in a small office at the medical clinic downtown. The nurse had left them alone after delivering the results. Sensing this was a private moment that didn't need witnesses. Outside the window, normal people walked by on the sidewalk, going about their normal lives, completely unaware that 2 men inside were about to discover if they were family. Do you want me to read it? Henry asked softly. Marcus shook his head. I'll do it. His voice sounded strange, like it was coming from someone else's throat. He tore open the envelope with steady hands, though inside his chest his heart was beating so hard he thought it might break his ribs. The paper inside was covered with numbers and scientific words he didn't understand, but at the bottom, in simple black letters, was the answer they'd both been waiting for. Probability of paternal relationship, 99.97%. Marcus read the line 3 times before the words sank in. Then he looked up at Henry, whose face had gone completely white. I'm your son, Marcus said, and the words felt foreign in his mouth. Henry made a choking sound and covered his face with his hands. His shoulders shook as 35 years of grief and hope crashed into each other all at once. Marcus didn't know what to do. Should he hug this man who was apparently his father? Should he comfort him? All he felt was a strange numbness, like he was watching this happen to someone else. I don't remember you, Marcus said quietly. I don't remember being David. I don't remember having a father or a family or a life before the accident. To me, you're still a stranger. Henry looked up, his eyes red but determined. That's okay. We'll figure it out together. But Marcus was already shaking his head. I can't just flip a switch and become your son. I've been Marcus for 15 years. I don't know how to be anyone else. They left the clinic in Henry's car, driving through neighborhoods Marcus had never seen before. Big houses with perfect lawns, expensive cars in every driveway, the kind of wealth Marcus had only glimpsed from a distance. Henry pulled up to a house that looked like it belonged in a magazine. 3 stories, with white columns and windows that sparkled in the afternoon sun. This was your home, Henry said. You grew up here. Marcus stared at the house and felt absolutely nothing. No recognition, no warmth, no sense of belonging. It might as well have been a picture of someone else's life. I can't live here, Marcus said. I wouldn't even know how to live here. Henry's face fell. I understand. But maybe you could visit sometimes? Maybe we could have dinner once in a while. Over the next few weeks, they tried to build something that looked like a relationship. Henry took Marcus to expensive restaurants where Marcus felt completely out of place. He bought Marcus new clothes that hung on him like costumes. He showed him photo albums full of a childhood Marcus couldn't remember. Nothing worked. Marcus felt like he was failing some test he didn't understand. Henry was trying so hard to love him, but Marcus couldn't figure out how to love him back. How do you love a stranger, even if that stranger is supposed to be your father? The breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday evening. They were sitting in Henry's enormous living room, looking through another photo album, when Henry started crying. "I missed everything," Henry sobbed. 35 years of your life. I should have found you sooner. I should have looked harder. I failed you as a father." Marcus felt something snap inside his chest. "Stop," he said firmly. "Just stop." Henry looked up, surprised. "You didn't fail me," Marcus continued. "You thought I was dead. You mourned for me for 35 years. That's not failure, that's love. But I should have. Should have what? You're not superhuman. You're just a person who lost his son and spent his whole life wishing things were different." Marcus leaned forward. "You want to know what I think? I think the son you lost was a good man. I think he would have been proud to have you as a father." Henry wiped his eyes. "But you don't remember him. You don't remember being him." "No, I don't. But I can see who you are. I can see how much you loved him. And maybe that's enough to start with." Something shifted in the room then, like sunlight breaking through clouds. "I'll never be the David you remember," Marcus said quietly. "That person died in the jungle 35 years ago. But maybe we can build something new. Maybe we could be Henry and Marcus, father and son, starting from right here." Henry nodded, fresh tears streaming down his face, but these tears looked different. Hopeful instead of desperate. "I'd like that," Henry whispered. 6 months later, Marcus had his own small apartment a few blocks from Henry's house. Not fancy, but clean and warm in his. He worked at one of Henry's warehouses, doing honest work for honest pay. He learned Henry's favorite coffee order, and Henry had learned that Marcus preferred quiet dinners to fancy restaurants. They met every Sunday for breakfast at a little diner downtown. They talked about simple things: work, weather, books they'd read. Slowly, carefully, they built a relationship that belonged to the people they were now, not the people they'd been before. On this particular Sunday, as snow fell softly outside the diner windows, Henry looked across the table at his son and smiled. "You know what I realized?" Henry said. "What's that?" "I spent 35 years looking for David, but what I really needed to find was you." Marcus smiled back, and for the first time since learning the truth about his identity, the smile felt completely genuine. "I'm glad you found me," Marcus said, "even if I'm not who you expected me to be." "You're exactly who you're supposed to be," Henry replied. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the city in a blanket of white. Inside the warm diner, a father and son sat together, two people who'd found their way back to each other across decades of loss and pain and hope. They weren't the same people who'd been separated by a plane crash 35 years ago, but they were family, and that was enough.